Welcome to the debate. So, picture this. You're walking through a truly ancient cemetery, maybe one from, I don't know, the early 17th century.
Right, the really old ones.
Exactly. And you inevitably come across these old headstones where the inscriptions have been worn completely smoothed by centuries of wind and rain. You look at it, and it is basically just a blank slab of rock.
Yeah, it's a stark image.
It really is. You stand there and you know someone is buried beneath it, someone who lived, who suffered, who probably mattered immensely to a small group of people. But the record of who they were is just, well, gone.
Completely erased.
Right. And for a lot of people, staring at that blank, weathered stone evokes a terror that is actually more profound than the thought of the physical death that put the person in the ground to begin with.
It is a profoundly visceral reaction, honestly. I mean, we look at that blank stone and we just project our own eventual erasure onto it. It pretty much captures the absolute definition of existential dread.
It does. And today we are exploring the deep psychological and philosophical questions that emerge from that exact dread. We're looking at the comparative fear of death versus the fear of being forgotten.
Which is a huge topic.
Immense. And we're asking a central question. Does the fear of being forgotten represent a fundamental, healthy human drive for continuity and meaning? Or is it an artificial construct that simply distracts us from accepting the natural reality of non-existence?
Right.
I will be arguing that the psychological drive to be remembered is a vital mechanism, one that provides our lives with significance and continuity well beyond our physical expiration.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I'll argue that the fear of being forgotten is basically a human construct designed to seek meaning in an indifferent universe. Ultimately, true peace comes from accepting non-existence as a natural part of the biological life cycle, rather than, fighting this unwinnable war against time.
Let's begin by unpacking the psychological and evolutionary foundation of this drive, because it's not just some poetic vanity project. It's hardwired into our biology.
Okay, but hardwired how exactly?
Well, from a deeply structural perspective, humans are fundamentally and inextricably social creatures. I mean, our entire evolutionary advantage, the reason we survived on the savannah, is based on our ability to network, right? To share information and to bind ourselves to one another in complex social webs.
Sure, yes.
Because of this, our very identities are tied to our memories and our relationships. We don't exist in a vacuum as isolated nodes. Who we are is largely defined by how we exist in the minds of others.
That is absolutely true while we are alive. I'll give you that. The social network is our survival mechanism.
Right, but I argue that mechanism doesn't just switch off when we contemplate the future. Because our brains operate as part of a distributed network, being remembered by others is what grants a human life a sense of significance and continuity. Leaving a mark ensures that an individual's existence actually mattered to the wider mesh of humanity. And when we look at the psychological data, we see that for many people, the fear of insignificance, of leaving absolutely no trace, rationally outweighs the biological fear of death itself.
Wow. Outweighs the fear of death?
Yes, because we can logically accept that our physical hardware, our bodies, will eventually fail. But the idea that our social identity, our software, will be entirely deleted from the collective memory is what truly terrifies us. It implies our existence had no lasting utility to the species.
See, that is exactly where the logic breaks down for me, right at the intersection of our biology and our philosophy. Let's look at the actual mechanism of what is happening in the brain when we feel that terror.
Okay.
Philosophically and biologically speaking, death marks the absolute end of consciousness. Once the brain ceases to function, the subjective experience of the individual is permanently over.
Yes, obviously.
But the problem is that the human brain, which is this engine meticulously evolved to predict the future and ensure survival, literally cannot simulate its own non-existence.
Ooh, interesting.
Right? When you try to picture being dead, you usually picture being in the dark or floating in a void or, watching your own funeral from above. You are just substituting a new conscious experience.
Because computing absolute nothingness is mathematically impossible for a conscious mind.
Precisely, because we cannot comprehend our own lack of consciousness, the brain panics and shifts its anxiety onto something it actually can conceptualize, which is our social standing.
Ah, I see where you're going.
It takes that deeply ingrained survival software you mentioned, the imperative to matter to the tribe, and misapplies it to a post-mortem state. Therefore, the terror of being forgotten is actually just a displaced fear of the pain of non-existence. Framing being forgotten as a fate worse than dying relies entirely on a human construct. We artificially design this fear to seek permanence in a universe where non-existence is simply a natural, inevitable part of the life cycle. The desperation for legacy is basically an intellectual illusion that obscures the natural order of things.
That is a fascinating way to frame it, as a misfiring of survival software. But I want to challenge your definition of what it means to actually exist.
Go ahead.
You are defining existence purely as subjective internal consciousness. But let's look at the mechanics of influence in the real world. Existence isn't just internal, it's external. It is about how your cognitive footprint shapes reality.
But a cognitive footprint is just the aftermath of a life. It is not the life itself.
Well, allow me to propose an analogy that might bridge the gap here. I view leaving a legacy as an organic social version of mind uploading.
Organic mind uploading? Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, in computer science, mind uploading is the theoretical concept of transferring a brain's architecture into a digital network so the identity survives the hardware failure. But haven't humans been doing a low-tech, organic version of this for millennia?
How so?
When a philosopher writes a treatise, or, a parent instills a deeply held moral framework into their child, they are successfully transmitting their identity, their values, and their consciousness into the collective network of humanity.
I see what you're saying, but
Wait, just to finish the thought. If you teach a child a specific way to view the world, and they pass that framework on, your thought processes are still actively shaping reality long after your biological body is gone. So I would ask you, if an individual's influence directly dictates the behavior and thoughts of the future, isn't that a scientifically and philosophically valid form of continued existence?
Look, I understand the appeal of that analogy, but I have to firmly reject it.
Really, why?
Because it fundamentally conflates the byproduct of a life with the actual experience of a life. Let's stick with your computer science analogy. Leaving instructions for a computer program is not the same as the computer running it.
Okay, fair.
when you write a book or even pass down a moral framework, you are leaving behind source code, a static, low-resolution artifact of your thoughts. The reader or the child is the hardware. But you, the original software, are not there to experience the code running in their mind. Memory is simply not consciousness.
But the code is still running. The impact is mathematically real.
The impact is real, sure, but your experience of it is zero. Think about the technological research being done right now into literal mind uploading, where subjective, continuous consciousness might actually be preserved digitally.
Right.
If we achieve that, where you never lose your subjective experience, the entire concept of legacy would vanish instantly.
You really think so?
Absolutely. Because the fear of being forgotten is merely a symptom of our mortal anxiety. If immortality became technologically feasible tomorrow, no one would care about their historical legacy because they would still be here to advocate for themselves. This proves that the drive for legacy is not some independent, fundamental human need. It is strictly a coping mechanism for the fact that we have to die.
I have to push back there. I am really not convinced that if we had technological immortality, the legacy drive would just vanish.
Why wouldn't it?
Because that assumes the desire for legacy is solely about self-preservation. I argue it's about social validation, which is a completely different mechanism. Let's bring this down to earth and look at how people behave right now.
Okay.
Think about why people relentlessly curate their social media profiles today, or why they experience such profound anxiety about how they are perceived at a high school reunion. They aren't in danger of dying at the reunion.
Obviously not.
They are in danger of being irrelevant. Even if we could live forever, we would still be social creatures. We would still desperately want our actions to have significance within the social fabric. The dread of erasure isn't just about avoiding the void. It is about mattering to the tribe. The anxiety of being irrelevant today is just practice for being forgotten tomorrow.
But mattering to the tribe is, again, a biological imperative designed to keep you safe while you are alive. If the tribe values you today, they share their resources with you, and they protect you from threats.
Right, that's the evolutionary basis.
Exactly. That is why the high school reunion causes anxiety. Your brain subconsciously thinks your social standing equates to your physical safety. Projecting that biological imperative past your own death is exactly the cognitive misfiring I'm talking about. You are applying a survival strategy to a state where survival is no longer applicable.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a misfiring.
Furthermore, we have to look at the physical reality of the universe. The universe operates on entropy. Everything eventually fades. Clinging to the idea that your organic mind upload into the social network will somehow last forever is just a denial of basic physics.
Okay, it is true that expecting entropic, eternal permanence is irrational. The stone will eventually wash black, as we said. But let's look at what that cognitive misfiring, as you insist on calling it, actually produces in the real world.
All right, let's look at it.
You are dismissing it as a glitch. But if it is a glitch, it is the most productive glitch in the history of our species. Let's look at the mechanics of human civilization. Why do people dedicate their entire lives to curing diseases they might not survive to see eradicated? Why do we build massive infrastructure projects or write constitutions that are designed to outlast us by centuries?
Wait, are you suggesting that all of human progress is driven purely by the fear of being forgotten?
I am suggesting it is a primary engine. The fear of being forgotten is a highly practical, incredibly healthy motivator. It forces a species that is naturally inclined toward short-term gratification to suddenly think in centuries. It drives individuals to live meaningful lives, to build deep relationships, and to make contributions that benefit society as a whole. Without this drive to transcend our own physical forgetfulness, we would never have developed historical archives, complex legal systems, or long-term scientific research. The desperation to leave a mark is the cornerstone of human progress.
Well, I will certainly give you the altruism of the scientist or the architect. The desire to contribute can motivate positive societal advancements. But let's look at the dark side of that exact same coin.
The dark side?
Yes. When framed as an existential necessity, an excessive fear of being forgotten frequently leads to profound anxiety and an incredibly unhealthy obsession with legacy. We see people who destroy their immediate realities, their marriages, their mental health, their ethical boundaries, all in a frantic bid to secure their place in history.
I acknowledge that, like any psychological drive, an obsession with legacy can become pathological if left unchecked.
But it is more than just pathological in the extremes. It alters the fundamental quality of how we experience time. I want to challenge you on the causality here.
Go ahead.
When the relentless pursuit of legacy and historical significance overshadows an individual's ability to actually appreciate the present moment, doesn't this psychological construct become fundamentally destructive?
In what sense?
In the sense that you are actively sacrificing the only thing you actually possess, the present moment of consciousness, for a hypothetical future where, as we established, you won't even exist to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Embracing the natural cycle of life and death is far healthier. It allows you to engage with life as it is, rather than treating your current existence as merely a stepping stone to your posthumous reputation.
You know, I haven't considered it quite like that. That hyper-focusing on legacy is effectively sacrificing consciousness for a hypothetical. That does highlight how difficult the cognitive task of balancing the future with the present really is.
Exactly. It's a huge cognitive burden.
But I still maintain that completely discarding the desire for legacy, as you suggest, strips away a crucial layer of what makes human life meaningful. You frame it as sacrificing the present, but I would counter that working toward a legacy actually enhances the present.
How so? If your eyes are fixed entirely on how you will be remembered, how are you enhancing today?
Because meaning is largely derived from connection to something larger than the self. When that scientist is working late in the lab on a cure they might not live to see finalized, they aren't necessarily miserable in the present.
Right.
Own satisfaction of being a crucial link in the chain of human endeavor. The motivation to not be forgotten isn't always a frantic, anxious grasping for fame.
But it often is.
Often, yes, but not always. Often it is a quiet, studying commitment to the human project. It weaves your present moment into the broader tapestry of time.
I think they have to separate the commitment to the human project from the personal, ego-driven fear of being forgotten. They are two different neurological pathways.
Are they?
Yes, a scientist can work on a cure because they want to alleviate future suffering. That is empathy. That is altruism. The fear of being forgotten, however, is inherently ego-driven. It is a specific desire for the self to be recognized and preserved. And that is exactly where the anxiety takes root.
Well, anxiety is part of the human condition.
Sure, but let's look at the mechanics of this specific anxiety. When you tie your life's value to whether or not people remember your specific name or your specific achievements, you are handing the criteria for your success over to a future you cannot control.
That is a risk, yes.
It is a massive psychological toll. It creates a paradigm where ordinary, quiet lives filled with deep love, everyday kindness, and community, but perhaps not historical magnitude, are somehow deemed less than or insignificant simply because they won't be remembered in 100 years. It devalues the ordinary human experience by setting an impossible metric for a successful life.
Now that is a vital distinction, and it goes right to the heart of how we define the word legacy.
How so?
You are equating the fear of being forgotten with the desire for historical fame, the ego wanting its name in a textbook. But for the vast majority of people, the fear of being forgotten is much more intimate and much more grounded.
Intimate in what way?
It is the fear of being forgotten by their grandchildren. It is the fear that the specific love, the quirks, the care they poured into their immediate community will just evaporate without a trace. It isn't about statues in the town square. It is about continuity of connection.
Okay.
And when an individual fears that intimate forgetting, it functions as a beautiful mechanism. It motivates them to invest deeply in their loved ones right now. It forces them to be present, to tell stories, to cultivate relationships that have real, enduring substance.
I have to tell you, framing it that way reveals a subtly darker mechanism at play.
Darker?
Yes. If you are investing deeply in your loved ones, largely so they will remember you after you are gone, that is essentially a transactional approach to love.
Transactional? How is wanting to be remembered by your grandchildren transactional?
Because true engagement with your family and community should be rooted entirely in the value of the shared experience in the present. If part of your motivation is legacy, you are basically using your relationships as an emotional insurance policy against your own mortality.
Oh, that's a harsh way to look at it.
It's the reality of the motivation. I argue that by philosophically accepting that you will eventually be forgotten, even by your direct descendants, as generations inevitably pass, you are actually liberated.
Liberated from what?
You are freed from the burden of performance. You can love your family simply because you love them in this exact moment, not because you are trying to write yourself into their long-term memory banks. Accepting absolute non-existence and eventual erasure allows you to look at the people around you and say, we are here now and that is enough.
We are here now and that is enough. I mean, there is an undeniable elegance to that philosophy.
Thank you.
But I question its realistic alignment with human neurobiology. We are fundamentally wired to project into the future. Our brains are pattern-seeking engines designed to connect cause and effect across time.
Right, but we can override that.
Cognitive function that naturally wants to connect the past, present, and future. I argue that the fear of being forgotten is not a glitch. It is a feature.
I still disagree on that.
Think about it. It is the very engine that drives intergenerational wealth, knowledge transfer, and cultural preservation. If we truly believed that the present moment was entirely sufficient and we felt no dread about our knowledge dying with us, we never would have developed written language, we wouldn't build libraries,
And yet, we have to look at the shifting landscape of individual beliefs across the globe to see that this feature is not universally absolute.
What do you mean?
The weight of this fear varies heavily based on cultural frameworks. Let's look at the data surrounding this. In many Eastern philosophical traditions, for example, the dissolution of the ego and the explicit acceptance of impermanence are central tenets of a healthy mind.
Yes, that's true.
The intense desperation to maintain a permanent individual identity, to leave a unique named mark, is heavily emphasized in modern, highly individualistic Western cultures. If this drive to be remembered were a universal, unalterable biological absolute, we wouldn't see such a vast cultural variance in how millions of people approach the concept of legacy.
That is an interesting point.
People can and do train their brains to accept impermanence. This reinforces my position that the dread of being forgotten is a constructed narrative. We build the fear through our cultural values, and therefore we have the power to dismantle it.
That is a fair critique of the cultural variances, though I would frame the mechanism differently. Even in cultures that emphasize impermanence and ego dissolution, there are incredibly robust mechanisms for honoring ancestors, maintaining a sense of lineage, and preserving the collective history.
Yes, but
The expression of the drive changes, sure. It becomes more about the collective stream rather than the individual drop of water. But the underlying psychological need for social continuity remains entirely intact.
honoring an ancestor is an action taken by the living to anchor themselves, not an action taken by the dead to preserve their ego.
A point well taken. However, we are approaching the end of our time, so let's summarize where we stand on this profoundly complex issue.
Sounds good.
Throughout our discussion, I have maintained that seeking continuity through memory is a defining, motivating psychological necessity for our species. Because we are inextricably social creatures, our identities exist within a network of relationships. The drive to leave a legacy, to shape the future, and to avoid being erased from the collective memory is not just vanity. It is the very engine that fuels our greatest societal achievements and deepens our interpersonal investments.
And I have maintained that this drive, while common and occasionally useful for societal progress, is ultimately an artificial human construct designed to mask the biological reality of our mortality.
Right.
Our brains simply cannot compute non-existence, so we invent legacy as a proxy for survival. True existential peace does not come from desperately trying to build an organic mind upload or an emotional insurance policy. It comes from philosophically accepting the natural cycle of absolute non-existence, which liberates us to fully and authentically engage with the present moment without the anxiety of the ego's future survival.
Despite our differing frameworks on the mechanics of the mind, we have certainly found important points of convergence today. Both of us firmly agree on the danger of letting the fear of being forgotten turn into a pathological obsession, one that devalues ordinary life and overshadows the raw appreciation of the present.
Absolutely.
Whether one views the drive for legacy as a vital engine of civilization or a comforting illusion that distracts us from reality, we both acknowledge that a delicate cognitive balance must be struck. We have to figure out how to live deeply meaningful lives while simultaneously accepting the hard physical limits of our own human mortality.
Exactly. The profound tension between our psychological wiring as interconnected social creatures and our stark philosophical reality as temporary mortal beings reveals the deep, beautiful complexity of the human condition. It is a paradox that every single conscious mind eventually has to navigate in its own way.
It is clearly a conversation that has no simple, mathematically perfect answers. And the research into human psychology and philosophy offers even deeper avenues to explore regarding what truly makes life meaningful. We leave it to you, the listener, to reflect on your own views of legacy, mortality, and what it means to leave a mark.
Well said.
Which brings us back to that ancient, rain-slicked cemetery we started in. When you look at that completely blank, weathered stone, does it fill you with the existential dread of eventual erasure? Or does it offer you the profound, quiet peace of knowing you will eventually return entirely to nature?